told us we could not talk about this to anyone, including any of the other crews, our spouses, our family, even amongst each other. So we could not discuss this at all.
In the military, they do ridicule you, and I was ridiculed a few times. I was told I would never make Master Sergeant. I was on orders for tech, but I was told I would never make Master Sergeant, and I brought this crap up again.
The pilots that had seen things and talked about it, some of them were let go, some of them released from their flying, and treated as nutcases and things like that.
At times I used to carry a nuclear weapon. In other words, I was mentally fit to carry nuclear weapons, but I'm not mentally fit if I see a UFO. Well, this criticism and this ridicule has, I think, done more to keep the story coming out than almost anything else.
It had been discussed with me on numerous occasions. Talked about what could happen to me militarily and what could happen to me even if I discussed this as a civilian. That subject just was dropped. It just wasn't discussed.
Anything to discredit you, and you'd never get a promotion, and I'd spend the next 3.5 years up the North Pole living in a tent checking weather balloons.
I've made no money from this. I've got nothing but pain and suffering out of it, out of talking about it. I've been harassed at my home. This was used against me partially in losing a job once in teaching. I've had a hell of a time after I've told this story, but I continue to tell the story because I think it's important for people to understand that this sort of shit goes on in the government.
Measures have been taken by agencies to terminate people who appear to be inconvenient or troublesome through knowing too much.
I would go interview people that claimed they had seen something and try to convince them they hadn't seen something or they were, hallucinating or something. Well, if that didn't work, another team would come in and give all the threats and threaten them, their family, and so on and so forth. And they would be in charge of discrediting them, making them look foolish, or so on and so forth. Now, if that didn't work, then there was another team that put an end to that problem, one way or the other. Secretary of Defense Forstall was the first real powerful known person that was eliminated because he was going to release the information. And nobody has ever paid for that crime. That crime had never been really thoroughly investigated by forces to see what happened to him. But most people know that he was thrown out the window of the hospital, and he wasn't killed by being thrown out the window, but he never got up alive.
He was talking about being erased. And I said, man, what do you mean, erased? He said, yes. He said, you will be erased. I said, how do you know all this? And there's something to that effect. And he said, I know. He said, they'll go after not only you, he said, they'll go after your family. And those were his words.
And they're yelling at me, and they're hollering and cursing, and you didn't see anything, and we'll do you and your whole goddamn family. And they're it was basically that for about 8 or 9 hours. They're just off on their own, There's no oversight, no control, and they just do whatever they want. They don't, I mean, and they're evil, man. These people are evil.
Basically, it's an oversight group intermingled with the National Security Council and the National Security Planning Group. They have full control. They have no congressional oversight whatsoever. They answer to nobody except for the President of the United States. But they're trying to push it aside away from the President.
When I was a corporate manager of Fairchild Industries in 1974 through 77, I met the late Dr. Werner von Braun in early 74. At that time, von Braun was dying of cancer, but he assured me that he would live a few more years in order to tell me about the game that was being played, that game being the effort to weaponize space.
Weapons in space is still a big enigma. Black covert operations have always been trying to do something like that.
Von Braun's purpose in life during the last years of his life, his dying years, was to educate the public and decision makers about why space-based weapons are dumb, dangerous, destabilizing, too costly, unnecessary, unworkable, undesirable. The strategy that Werner von Braun taught me was that first the Russians are going to be considered to be the... When I met him in 74, they were the enemy, the identified enemy. We were told that they had killer satellites. We were told that they were coming to get us and control us, the dirty commies, that whole story. First, the Russians were the enemy against whom we're going to build space-based weapons.
The ballistic missile defense system is probably a pipe dream in the sense that if what it's designed for is that you know where it's coming from. And when we had Russia, there was a 50-50 chance that you knew about where it would be coming from.
In 1977, I was at a meeting in Fairchild Industries in a conference room called the War Room. And in that room were a lot of charts on the walls with enemies, identified enemies, names that people had never heard of, names like Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi. But we were talking then about terrorists, the potential terrorists. No one had ever talked about this before, but this was the next stage after the Russians against whom we were going to build space-based weapons, these terrorists.
They wanted a weapon system they could put in space that would stop a ballistic missile. That was the concept.
This is 1977, and they were talking about creating a war in the Gulf region when there was $25 billion in the space-based weapons program that yet had not been identified. It wasn't called the Strategic Defense Initiative, at least, until 1983. This weapons system then had obviously been going on for some time that I didn't know anything about.
When Star Wars was brought out as an idea, which was before Reagan actually, and incorporated into his administration, it became pretty much a window dressing, as one people would call it, but there was a lot of truth behind what they were trying to do. They knew the basic principle of what they wanted to do.
So I stood up in this meeting in 1977 and it said, I'd like to know why we're talking about space-based weapons against these enemies. I'd like to know more about this. Would somebody tell me what this is about? Nobody answered. They went on with this meeting as though I hadn't said anything. We heard a lot about terrorism. Then we were going to identify third world country crazies. We now call them nations of concern.
With the rogue nations we have today, it's absolutely ludicrous.
But he said that would be the third enemy against whom we would be needing to build space-based weapons. And the next enemy was asteroids. Now at this point, he kind of chuckled the first time he said it. Asteroids, against asteroids we're going to build space-based weapons. So it was funny then. And the funniest one of all was against what he called aliens, extraterrestrials. That would be the final card. And over and over and over, during the 4 years that I knew him and was giving his speeches for him, he would bring up that last card. And remember, Carol, the last card is the alien card. We're going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens. And all of it, he said, is a lie.
Well, if they were hostile, my own knowledge is, and feeling, I don't know about all of it, is that we could have been with their weaponry, as it might be used, could have destroyed us a long time ago.
If beings can travel in time-space, then anything we would put in orbit as a weapon would be like going against Genghis Khan with a firecracker.
Now, some would like for us to believe and like to develop the idea that the aliens and people are our enemy now. But that's not true.
I noticed the satellite's positions. I said, now, this is supposed to be a system that tracks radar anomalies on Earth, right? You know, the whole thing, the movement. Yep, that's what it does. And I said, so why are half of them pointed towards the outer space? Towards the moon, towards areas that are just blank space.
I have concluded that I'm fighting against the clock. That I have but a short time to try to convince people that we are moving in an avenue where we are going to militarize space. As a result of militarizing space, we are going to acquire new technology. We're going to evolve new technology.
At least half of those satellites you got up there aren't looking at Earth.
He had to receive several transmissions from the Pentagon and from other satellite monitoring stations of the NSA that they were tracking ETVs, extraterrestrial. That stands for extraterrestrial vehicles.
I said, what are they looking for? He says, well, you got to have them need to know about that.
We put nuclear weapons out in space as a line of defense, and we was ready to blow them up if they started in.
He didn't mention a timeline, but he said that it was going to be speeding up faster than anybody could possibly imagine.
Okay, we're not joking about this, but Dan was at window 1. He looked out, he saw an object floating nearby. We took several pictures of it. It's fairly small.
We just heard that in the process of poring over that heat shield, they found 3 more objects floating in close proximity to the space shuttle Atlantis. There you go, 1, 2, and 3. Unclear what those are. Maybe a 4th there. Unclear what those are. Could be ice. Could be little pieces of harmless debris. Worst case scenario, could be parts of the heat shield. And that is why NASA is concerned.
So it's very hard to identify what those little things might be.
We are going to acquire new technology. We're going to evolve new technology that's going to lead us into interstellar travel. As a direct result, we will become a threat to them unless we spiritually grow also.
Air Force Space Command, Masters of Space. June 9th, 2006. Air Force Space Command was crucial in Zarqawi hit. Air Force Space Command news release. Air Force Space Command delivered space combat effects for the precision strike that resulted in the death of terrorist leader Abu Musam al-Zarqawi, head of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. A global positioning system aided GBU-38 Joint Direct Attack Munition was one of the 2 munitions used in the bombing of Zarqawi's last safe house. An artist's concept shows a GPS satellite orbiting Earth. We have to credit Lockheed Martin for this one, folks. Once again, GPS-aided munitions played a significant role in the success of an important operation, said Brigadier General Donald Alston, Director of Air and Space Operations, or AFSPC. We provide communications, navigation and timing, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, and missile warning. Our mission is 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, providing space effects to the warfighter, said Vice Commander Major General Bush is expected to issue a directive in the next few weeks giving the U.S. Air Force a green light for the development of space weapons, potentially triggering a new global arms race, it was reported yesterday. The new weapons being studied range from hunter-killer satellites to orbiting weapons using lasers,